Schools reopen here in France, the latest step out of the pandemic lockdown, but not all parents are convinced that it's safe to go back to the class. Brazil's COVID-19 death toll tops 50,000. The figures are following suit across the rest of Latin America. 10 more French children born to jihadist parents have been repatriated from war-torn Syria. They're receiving medical care and have been taken in by French social services. Thank you very much for being with us. French schools opened their doors to greet pupils this Monday for what the government says is 2 weeks of obligatory lessons before the summer break. Although many parents may yet choose to defy the decision and keep their children at home. Here at France 24, Emerald Maxwell.
It was still winter when these children last set foot in school. Now across France, they're going back to finish the final weeks of the summer term.
J'ai quand même hâte de retrouver toutes mes amies à l'école et aussi de revoir tous mes profs.
Parce que je retrouve mes amis et je trouve que c'est plus facile de travailler à l'école qu'à la maison.
All of France's 6.8 million school children are now expected to go back to class after a lockdown Education Minister Jean-Michel Blanquer called a global catastrophe for education. Despite having only 2 weeks left before the summer break, Blanquer stressed the importance of pupils' attendance.
Ce serait quand même extraordinaire que le ministre de l'Éducation nationale vous dise que 2 semaines de cours, ça ne compte pas. Bien sûr que ça compte chaque jour, chaque heure de cours compte, mais il y a une sorte de retour d'expérience à faire avec les élèves, et puis maintenant aussi une forme de consolidation et de préparation à ce qui les attend pour l'année prochaine.
Parents France 24 spoke to agreed the return was the right thing for children.
Oui, c'est très important parce qu'ils ont passé quand même 3 mois à faire de l'école partielle.
Ça permet un peu de se resocialiser, de reprendre un peu un rythme.
The government has called for trust from the public. Secondary school pupils are required to wear masks, and 1 metre social distancing measures are still in place for all age groups, even if it is harder to enforce when it's time for break.
More than 50,000 people now have been killed by COVID-19 in Brazil. President Jair Bolsonaro's initial dismissal of the virus as nothing but a cold now looks like the wrong decision indeed. His country has the second highest death toll in the world. And this is a trend across Latin America where cases are soaring. Chile, Mexico and Peru are also seeing their healthcare facilities pushed towards the brink of collapse. Our chief foreign editor, Robert Parsons, has this.
The situation is catastrophic in Brazil, moving towards 55,000 people dead there, over 1 million people infected, second only to the United States. Of course, it has a slightly smaller population, but it's enormous, 200 million people. And if those experts are right about the number of people who may have died, given the present rate of increase by August, 125,000 people perhaps, if things continue at this rate. And that's with the figures we're working on the moment, with very limited testing, relatively limited testing. It really is a pretty bad situation. And one of the reasons for it, apart from the ones I've given already, the problems of an overstretched health service, poverty, and the way it's been affecting particularly the indigenous populations of Brazil and other countries in the region. One of the problems particular to Brazil is the intense politicization of the reaction to the coronavirus. President Bolsonaro has been extremely dismissive, to put it mildly, of the coronavirus, describing it as just a little cold at one stage, saying he much prefers to keep the economy moving, saying that the damage done to society through lockdowns far worse than the damage done by the coronavirus. This is causing a lot of political and social division in Brazil, because by and large, the coronavirus has been hitting the poorest sectors of the population much harder than the wealthier. And we've seen massive demonstrations over the last few days, weeks, which have coincided with demonstrations calling for the impeachment of President Bolsonaro, of course, a range of other issues as well. So the issue of coronavirus in Brazil, highly politicized at the moment, with no sign at all that President Bolsonaro is going to change his approach.
France 24's chief foreign editor Robert Parsons there. After more than 100 days of coronavirus lockdown, New York City residents this Monday celebrated the lifting of more restrictions by getting their first haircuts in months, shopping at reopened stores and dining at outdoor cafes. First world problems, you might say, but nonetheless, this is a return to some kind of normality for many people. In other US states, though, the picture was less good. The number of new cases rose by a record last week in Arizona, California, Florida and Texas. These states home to about a third of the US population. Alabama, Georgia, Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Utah and Wyoming also experiencing record spikes. The pandemic clearly not over in the United States, no matter what any politician might choose to say. And of course, we're watching for all developments on that story. Now, in spite of the rise in the number of new cases, stock markets don't seem to be affected by the news. Yuka Roya now joins us from our business desk. Good evening to you. Great to see you. Wall Street stocks are actually rallying, I understand, this Monday.
Well, all three major indices finished the day comfortably in the green, with the Nasdaq actually seeing a record finish, a record closing high. The technology shares led the gain, including Apple, which announced it would switch to its own chips from Intel products for its Mac computers later on this year. Earlier, the European and Asian markets did suffer losses because of coronavirus concerns after the WHO warned of a resurgence in cases in certain countries.
Well, here in France, after receiving the Tunisian president at the Élysée Palace, President Macron travelling out on Tuesday to the Netherlands. Tell us more.
Well, he's going to The Hague to meet with the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte to try and get him to back a proposed EU coronavirus recovery plan. The €750 billion package was put forward by the European Commission at the end of last month. It would see the EU raise a huge amount of money through common debt for the first time. Most of it will be transferred as grants to countries hardest hit by the pandemic, like Italy and Spain. France and Germany have been pushing for it, but some wealthier countries in the north are opposing the idea of mutual debt to help some southern countries that rely heavily on tourism. The Netherlands, where President Macron is heading tomorrow, is among the so-called frugal four, along with Sweden, Denmark and Austria. They say help should be given in the form of loans instead, with tough conditions attached.
And Yuka, France's finance minister was in Germany this Monday to discuss the way forward with his like-minded counterpart. Tell us more.
In Germany, of course, Bruno Le Maire went to Berlin on his first overseas trip since the coronavirus lockdown was lifted. He and German Finance Minister Olaf Scholz jointly called for a swift compromise on the EU Recovery Fund, so an agreement could be reached at next month's EU summit. Let's take a listen.
It's time to decide now. We need the money now, and we need to support our economies in all European nations now. So it's time to decide. We have everything on the table to provide support to our economies, and the quicker, the better.
Bruno Le Maire, the finance minister there of France in Germany. We're watching that story for all developments. Yuka Rowe, the business. Thank you very much indeed. Great to see you. Thank you. France has announced this Monday it's brought home 10 French children of jihadist fighters. They were brought in overnight from the refugee camps in Syria. This is the latest in a repatriation process that began since the Islamic State group was ousted from its Syrian base in March 2019.
Thousands of children of foreign-born fighters have been living in camps like this one in northeastern Syria since the Islamic State group was ousted in March 2019. The issue of what to do with them has divided international opinion. France has announced it's brought home 10 French minors who are receiving medical treatment and have been taken in by social services. That's on top of the 18 it has repatriated since last year. But it's just a fraction of the estimated 300 French children still residing at 3 Kurdish-run refugee camps in Syria. In total, 4,000 women and 8,000 children there are foreign citizens, wives and children of the fighters who went to join the so-called Islamic State. Syrian Kurdish authorities want them repatriated, and human rights groups have been fighting to bring home the children, arguing that they shouldn't be made to suffer for their parents' sins. The camps lack schools and adequate healthcare, and infectious diseases are rampant, killing dozens of people a month. Currently, though, only a handful of countries, including Russia, Kosovo and Kazakhstan, have repatriated women and children in large numbers. With public opinion broadly against repatriation, Western governments are more resistant. A poll in France last year found 2/3 of people favoured leaving the children of jihadists in Syria. European countries are generally operating on a case-by-case basis. They insist that women who join the Islamic State group should be tried in Syria, where they committed their alleged crimes, and cite difficulties in separating children from their mothers. Most of the small number of repatriated European children so far have been orphans or in ill health.
So 10 more French children of jihadist parents brought back from the refugee camp there in Syria, currently being looked after by social services and receiving medical attention. That's it for this bulletin. Stay with us though. More to come. You're watching France 24.